Uh,
Hello, and welcome to the first edition of the 4 on 5 podcast. I am your host, Zach Oliver. Tonight I am joined by Andrew Montaigne, James Griffo, Rick Stone, and Akbar Naqvi. Um, the 4 on 5 podcast is going to pretty much be four people just talking about basketball. Each podcast, we're going to have five different topics, and our four panelists tonight, which are Andrew, James, Rick, and Akbar, will discuss said topics. We all cover a different array of basketball teams. Andrew covers who do you cover? The New Orleans Pelicans. For Fanside, it's Pelican Debrief. James covers the New York Knicks for Daily Knicks. Rick also covers the Pelicans for Pelican Debrief. And Akbar covers the Washington Wizards for Bullets Forever on SB Nation. Well, guys, any thoughts to start off the show?
Kobe, we had some nice games tonight, especially that in San Antonio, Portland, triple overtime.
Anthony Davis is good at basketballing.
So is John Wall.
Damian Lillard is a hacker.
Okay, well, if you've been under a rock for the last couple of days, you might have missed this, but the Boston Celtics traded their longtime point guard, Rajon Rondo. Rondo, along with rookie power forward Dwight Powell, will be going to the Dallas Mavericks, while Brandon Wright, Jameer Nelson, Jay Crowder, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick will be going to the Celtics. Drew, what were your initial thoughts on the trade once you heard that these two teams were discussing?
Well, when I first heard they were discussing, I was not shocked necessarily. Dallas is one of those teams who point guard was their weakest position by far on the team, and they were looking to improve after the Western Conference turned into more of a gauntlet than we thought it was going to be in the first place. Then the trade was made, and they have yet to play a game with Rondo as the starting point guard. I think it's important that we kind of take a step back and realize that we don't know how this is going to work yet. But on the in the same turn, you have to also look forward to what could be, what could go wrong, what could go right. I tend to think it's going to be a successful experiment. Rondo is one of the best passers in the league. He's a really good rebounding point guard. He leads the league with, I believe, 9 triple-doubles in the last 3 years. His shooting has been the main concern, and that's been the topic of concern for him moving to this team and the fact that they gave up shooting point guard to get him. But I think the fact that he is one of the best passers, he has the highest assist usage percent in the league, even above John Wall and Ty Lawson, Chris Paul, guys who are known for passing the ball and hitting open guys. I think pick and rolls with Dirk are going to be devastating. Tyson Chandler, same way. And being able to find Monte Ellis cutting and Chandler Parsons out on the wing or cutting both. I mean, I think there's a lot of options you can have with that offense. So I like the move. I also like it for Boston though. They got back Brandon Wright, Jay Crowder, and then Jameer Nelson. I don't see Jameer Nelson being there that long. I think they waive him or trade him another move. But at the same time, they got protected picks, but they have 9 in the next 4 years, I believe, and possibly 11. 2 of them are protected. So I mean, I feel like Boston came out not necessarily on top. I feel like this is a good trade for both sides, but at the same time, what Boston got out of it was definitely worth it for where they were sitting on top of Rondo.
Right, and this has kind of been categorized as a move that could push that Mavericks team up to the next level. What kind of impact do you think that has on their standing in that tough Western Conference?
I think it pushes them up a little bit as far as the starting lineup goes for sure. I think they're going to start winning a few more games, assuming that he fits in with his offense. And Rick Carlisle, in my opinion, second best coach in the league. Assuming he can work him in there, get this offense to adjust, and they can get rolling. I think this is probably the second, maybe third best starting lineup in the West. So,
James, what do you think about the trade for both sides?
Well, I thought at first I was a little skeptical about it. It seemed as if Dallas was, in a sense, kind of like trading the farm somewhat. But then, I definitely think, though, Dallas will absolutely benefit from Rondo's pass first distributing. Now you have, Rondo and Monte Ellis, who Monte Ellis last year was, I think, one of the best pick and roll point guards. I mean, he had carte blanche at the point guard position last year, so he's going to be moving back to his, traditional shooting guard role, which, I mean, I think him and Rondo will definitely mesh well. And I do think Boston did get a lot out of this trade. Brandon Wright certainly being the main piece, and of course the protected picks. Those are definitely very helpful as well. Jameer Nelson, I mean, should be able to provide that veteran leadership to the Celtics, to their young core. Jay Crowder can be a very reliable sharpshooter at times, and I think it's just as long as the Mavericks get Rondo in free agency this upcoming offseason, because I'm definitely not fond of rent-a-player deals at all. I think those are horrible, and they're terrible. So this is definitely the Mavericks win now. They're definitely in win now mode with by making this trade.
Right, and it's been reported that Rondo has said that he's open to re-signing with Dallas, and it's clear that Dallas has interest in keeping him, or else they wouldn't have made this deal for arguably their most important bench player in Brandon Wright. What kind of impact does this have on their bench going forward, though?
I mean, I do think Al Farouk Aminu. I was always fond of Aminu, and he's been off to a very sluggish start from what I understand this year. I mean, with Rondo's penetration is incredible. Like, he can draw like triple teams in the paint, and you could have Richard Jefferson, for example, like staying in the corner, or even Aminu shooting threes. I mean, and if Richard Jefferson misses like a corner three, Aminu is still, to me, a very underrated rebounding forward. So he could maybe get the offensive board and then kick back out to maybe Devin Harris or someone like that, and and then you have Chandler Parsons who's a very deadly wing shooter as well, and he's been on a scoring tier lately. So I think all around, not only the bench but all around, I think this move will definitely be beneficial for the Mavericks as a collective, no matter if it's the bench or if it's the starting five.
Right. Rick, as somebody who covers a team in the Western Conference, what kind of impact do you think this could have on not only the Mavericks but the Western Conference as a whole?
Well, look, it's going to make the West that much tougher. I mean, Dallas did what they could to give their icon, Dirk Nowitzki, one more shot at the title. They knew they were in that middle of the pack, and they had to do something, and Rondo was the point guard that was there. And they made that selection, and they gave up their farm system for it. Wright was a really good potential player, really their only big guy on their bench, so it's going to be tough to kind of replace him. They're going to have to do some experimenting with the guys that they have to try and find out what they're going to do. Gave up draft picks, and they gave up a lot for him, but it's going to take some time. We can't really make too much out of the first couple games with Rondo. It's going to take time to see how he fits into the roster and how it goes, but it definitely catapults them up in the West to one of the top tier teams. But there is certain of a gamble to it. There's a possibility Rondo may not re-sign. He's going to look at the other offers, and he would be dumb not to look at other offers. There's going to be teams that are willing to give him a lot of money, and at this point of his career, he's got to look at that. And Dallas gave up a lot, and Boston in this point, they looked at this, they said, are we really going to get a better deal than this? And the decision had to be no, and they took a gamble with Wright. They've already got Jared Sullinger. They've got Kelly Olynyk, so it's interesting to see what they'll do with him, where he'll be. Will he start? Will he come off the bench? Jameer Nelson is one of those guys that could very well be, in somewhere else by the next season. He's a veteran. He'll get a deal with a good team, something like that. And Crowder is interesting. They don't really have a lot of depth to small forward. They could move Jeff Green, so Crowder has the ability to develop. He's young. He has some strengths. So I think Boston got a good deal for Dallas. This was just a chance to make that leap to the next level. And it's going to take some time, but they can get there.
Right, and you touched a little bit on Brandon Wright and the bigs that they already have. Do you think that this is Boston saying, okay, we're gonna load up on bigs and then kind of figure it out later, or do you think that they could potentially look to move Wright, who is going to be a free agent again this offseason around the trade deadline?
I think Boston may be looking a little bit at what Houston did with just stockpiling, talent that they can move for something bigger at some point. I'm not sure they know what to do. I kind of feel like this was not really a panic decision, but one of those, look, this is what we got to do. We'll figure out what we're going to do with it later. Let's just get something out of Rondo right now. So I'm not really sure what they're going to do. We'll have to see what happens with Ainge. And I think for Dallas, even though they lost Wright, there are other pieces they can pick up. Emeka Okafor is still out there. Jermaine O'Neal is still out there. They can pick up people to fill up that hole. But Wright gave them something. He just has that fun ability to be a really effective shooter. He has some defense that he can use, and he's a work in progress. But he's a good player, and Boston's going to have to figure out if they want to keep him or if they can actually get some good value. It's a tough decision. Is he better than what Sullinger can become? Is he more than what Olynyk can become? That's a big question. But they're going to have some time to figure that out over the year, and they're not really doing anything else. It's clear they're not competing for a playoff spot, so they'll have some time to really figure out what they have in him. But it'll be good to see. It's good to see him maybe get a chance to start and what he can do with added minutes. Yeah,
I think that you're kind of onto something with their stockpiling assets and hoping that they can make a deal later. We saw how that works out for Houston, and now they're one of those premier teams in the Western Conference. Akbar, as somebody who covers the Wizards and gets to see a guy like John Wall every night and the kind of impact that he has, I mean, they're going from Jameer Nelson, who's probably best served as a guy coming off the bench now, to arguably a top 12, 15 point guard in the league. How much of an impact do you think that's going to have on their already lethal offense?
I mean, it helps in the standpoint of, they already had one of the best offenses in the league, but they probably wanted to go over that hump because they were despite being a really good team already and on pace for high 50s in terms of wins, they needed a guy to help them go over the hump. And really, Rondo was the closest thing they had at this point. And even if he makes them worse, which I personally doubt, I'm just hypothetical. Even if he makes them worse, it's a risk worth taking because it's a team that needs to go all in now. And having a guy like Rondo, having a passer like that, just maximizes everyone else. Parsons has struggled a little this year, despite being on a tear lately. Monte's a ball-dominant guy, but he can move off the ball a bit, and his shooting is improved. And obviously Dirk pick and rolls and Tyson pick and rolls, those will be lethal. So I think Rondo's role is going to be important for them, and it's definitely going to take time because the Mavericks run a free-flow offense where pretty much everyone gets the ball moving quickly. and there's a lot of ball movement in general. But Rondo is more of a patient, probing kind of player. But it's Rick Carlisle, and Rick Carlisle is one of the best in the league at adjusting his offense to his players' talents. So I expect it to work out eventually with Rondo and everything.
Right, and you touched on it a little bit. Do you think that it's good that they went and got this deal done when they did rather than waiting? I mean, even if they waited a month or if they waited till the trade deadline to potentially do this?
I mean, you should. There was really no need to delay this because you want to get Rondo acclimated to the system as fast as possible, really, and that could take half a season. It could take 10 games. It really depends on how much Rondo processes everything, how much he adjusts his game, how much Carlisle adjusts his game to him, how much the players around him adjust to him. So it's better to figure out all this stuff now. So they may start slow and they may, I'm not sure if they'll move up in the Western Conference standings, but by the time the playoffs come around, I think Rondo's presence will have a huge impact possibly, and, it could potentially turn them into a contender for the finals, really. So.
Yeah, I think that you guys all bring really good points, and I think it's going to be a really good move for both sides in the end. Before we move on, what would you guys, how would you guys grade the trade for each team? We'll start with Andrew.
For Dallas right now, just because we don't know about whether or not Rondo's going to sign for sure, and also exactly how he's going to fit into this offense, I'm going to give them a B. And they gave those picks away, but they're heavily protected, and they brought in a backup power forward who some people think could be decent in this league, and then obviously they brought in Rondo too to help kind of build stature at that point guard position. Maybe take some of the pressure off of Monte as a ball handler. So I give them a B plus, somewhere in that range. And then for the Celtics, I'm going to give them an A. They got pieces, potential picks, and they got rid of a player who was more than likely going to leave anyways. So.
Yeah. James?
Yeah, I would agree with Andrew on the Mavericks. I think it's a B. Like anything else, like time will definitely tell whether Rondo will acquiesce to Rick Carlisle's offense. And I do think though that the Mavs do need to bulk up on especially front court depth because their front court depth after this trade is like in the pooper. They're gonna have to. Like Rick suggested, like Jermaine O'Neal would be a very, very. He would definitely solidify the center position, and he would give some front court depth. I mean, there are definitely other bigs out there, but Jermaine O'Neal, I think, would definitely fit that role perfectly. As for the Celtics, I do believe somewhere along the lines of an A minus. The picks, of course. Danny Ainge is like the master of stockpiling assets, along with like Daryl Morey, and Brandon Wright, I think, is a very serviceable player, and Jay Crowder, like I said before, could be a very reliable sharpshooter at times, and so I mean, they'll I think both parties will definitely do well after this trade.
Rick, what say you?
I'm gonna flip it around. I'm gonna give Dallas the A minus because even though Dirk's gonna retire a few years, this is a guy that if they re-sign him, can be part of a core that they're building with Monte Ellis. Really like Tyson Chandler on that team, Chandler Parsons. That's a young group that can compete for a while, even after Dirk leaves. And look, they gave up a lot, but you look at some of these other deals that Boston was getting before, like the Lakers offering Jordan Hill in a first. They didn't give up as much as other teams were offering. And to be able to get a guy that before the year, maybe they weren't even in the talks for Rondo, that's a huge plus for them. They got an upgrade that they really, really needed at the point to be a real contender. This is a really good move and an underrated one that I'm not sure a lot of people saw coming. for the Celtics, it's going to be a B just because of the other deals that they had. And just last second, they decided to make this move. They got a lot of good pieces. They got what they could from Dallas. Wright's going to be a really good player. He can fit anywhere, even if you're just moving him. Jay Crowder's a young player. And the picks are all right. One of them might pan out to be a decent rotation player. They could have tried to see what else they could get. They could have taken one of the other deals. But for Rondo, they got a pretty good package. So you can't really complain too much if you're Boston.
And finally, Akbar.
For Dallas, I'd probably give him a solid B plus, mainly because I like the trade. But in the end, it is a big risk, even though it's a risk they had to take. It's worth questioning whether Rondo is really the same player in terms of scoring anymore, whether he can, not shoot 30% at the line or under 40% from the field. But at the same time, they needed something to get over the hump in Dirk's last years, and they possibly got it with Rondo. And I think it's going to work out, but there's definitely some questions there. And for Boston, probably a B because they just I feel like they made this trade a year too late, but at the same time they basically got what they wanted in terms of picks and assets like Wright and Crowder. Wright's on a good contract, and he's a nice, solid pick and roll player. He can help the young guards in young guards in Boston develop, and and Crowder's a nice shooter and everything. So I think it fits what they want to do, but they may have just made it a year too late. So that's why I give them a B.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They got what they could, and I think that it's going to work out really well for both sides. Rondo wasn't the only player on the move. Today, the Houston Rockets acquired Corey Brewer in a 3-team trade from the Minnesota Timberwolves. They also acquired Alexei Shved from the Philadelphia 76ers, and it only cost them a couple of second-rounders and their young sharpshooter, Troy Daniels. James, what kind of impact do you think this has on their bench, which somewhat lacked that depth, especially with the injuries that they have currently to Kostas Papanikolaou, and Jason Terry's been in and out of the lineup?
Well, it'll definitely certainly increase their depth. I mean, let me just take a look at what they have on this bench. They have Isaiah Canaan, Joey Dorsey, and the Rockets waived Francisco Garcia to make room for Corey Brewer, and Francisco Garcia was shooting 27%. That, last time I checked, that's pretty abysmal. And Corey Brewer, who scored 52 points against the Rockets last season, that might have been a little indicator of trading for him this year. Maybe, who knows? But no, I really like this trade, considering that what they traded for. I mean, Troy Daniels was last year in the playoffs. He made some nice threes. Was it against, I think it was the Blazers, and But other than that, I do believe that they definitely got the bang for the buck, the Rockets in this trade for sure.
Yeah, and it was really a deal that they kind of needed to make, especially if they wanted to shore up that wing position that's kind of been a little bit in flux. If you look at it from the other team's standpoints, what do you think about the deal for Minnesota and I guess for Philadelphia?
I mean, hey, I guess Philly. I mean, Philly's Philly, so they're just adding another. I just want to see if they can get more players than they had on last year's roster, because that they may seem like they're on pace to do that. But Minnesota, I mean, who knows? I mean, Troy Daniels. I mean, I don't really know if he could make a colossal difference. But hey, who knows? I mean, anything could happen at this point.
Right, and I believe I saw a stat earlier that in the next 5 years or so, the 76ers have 15 second-round picks, and clearly Sam Hinkie isn't done. It seems like every deal that they've made involves at least one second-rounder, and as much flack as he gets for it, second-rounders are considerably valuable since they're it's non-guaranteed money. So that's big, especially for a team that's close to the hard cap or the luxury tax line.
Yeah, any draft pick's a good pick. I mean, no matter if the guy sucks or no matter if the guy, becomes like decent or very good. I mean, a pick's a pick, Sam Hinkie, keep on doing what you're doing. Wish the Knicks front office would take note.
Rick, when you first saw this, we've heard Brewer's name tossed around. Cleveland was interested, the Clippers were interested. I mean, maybe even the Pelicans could have gotten in there because they could use some wing help. When you first heard about the deal, what were your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, Houston was in the Rondo sweepstakes for a while, so when they saw that Dallas got him, they had to know they had to make a move. I imagine this was their backup plan if they weren't able to get Rondo. They had Minnesota on speed dial to say, let's get this deal done. We're not going to get Rondo. Let's get something. This helps their depth. I mean, their bench this year has been kind of iffy. They haven't used a lot of guys. We've seen them in back-to-backs rarely go to their bench, which is risky in a long season like this. I think Brewer helps them with just the ability to play. His effort out there is really fun to watch. He's a guy that can play a lot of minutes if need be. He's a guy that's just does the fundamentals, and sometimes that's the guy you need. And Shved, he can play. He's one of those guys that if you're going to let go of Francisco Garcia and you're going to let go of Troy Daniels, it's nice to get a guy like Shved that you can experiment, that can shoot, that can do things on the court that you need. I actually like this deal for all the teams. I think Houston got the pieces that they needed to help them get their team just playing better. I love Minnesota's Troy Daniels pickup. Like, he's just a really, really good shooter. And for a team that does not shoot a lot of threes and has had very little success this season, he's a really, really nice pickup, especially since that team has had a lot of struggles finding shooting guards. The Kevin Martin experiment, they've never really had a shooting guard that they've had a lot of positives with, and I really like Troy Daniels. And for the Sixers, hey, give Hinkie flack for trying to build a fort with all his second-round picks. It's always like a lottery pick, and sometimes they hit. Look at KJ McDaniels this year. He's turning out to be kind of a fun player, and they got him with a second-rounder. So you never really know what you're going to get with those picks. It's always nice to stockpile them if you can, and if you're going to tank, that's your strategy, is to stockpile and hopefully hit the lottery once with a second rounder that works. Go for it. He's got a plan and he's doing it.
Right, and we've seen some second rounders really pan out. Anderson Varejao was a second rounder. DeAndre Jordan, Monte Ellis, just to name a few. But you kind of touched on it from the Timberwolves standpoint that they've kind of struggled to find that shooting guard moving forward. They got Andrew Wiggins in the Kevin Love trade. They have Shabazz Muhammad. They have Glenn Robinson III. Do you think that this is just the beginning of them kind of having a fire sale per se and moving a guy like Kevin Martin or a guy like Chase Budinger to open up time for those young guys?
Well, I think you definitely have to consider it. Minnesota's in no position to compete anytime soon, and maybe they can try to find some assets for some of those younger guys. What can you do? They've got some guys who can play, but they're not in a position to compete anytime soon. So if you're them, you want to see at least try and field those players out. See what kind of offers you can get. If it's anything you like, and if anything you want to take, then go for it. But I do kind of like Troy Daniels long-term on this team. I think he's a good shooter, and I think they're at least going to give him a lot of minutes to play. You mentioned all the guys, Muhammad, Robinson, Andrew Wiggins. Other than Wiggins, those guys are mostly small forward. He's a little too tall to play shooting guard, and I just like Troy Daniels, especially with a team that has no shooters. And he's young. He's shown that he can hit big shots with Houston in the playoffs. he's an interesting prospect that you've got to at least be willing to give him a shot.
Yeah, he's kind of one of those guys that every team could use. Somebody that you're down 6-7 late in the game. You just need somebody that can come in and shoot a three, and that's what Kyle Korver really was when he came into the league, and now he's one of the better small forwards out there. So,
I mean, he can pan out, and it'll definitely help the rest of the team if they can space out the defense, because they've had issues trying to drive inside and just getting blocked all over the court. Troy Daniels going to help that.
Yeah, it's an extremely low risk and with potential high reward for them. Akbar, you look at the Western Conference and some of the wings that he's going to be going up against. Kevin Durant is probably the biggest one, and maybe that's if Houston gets up into that 3-4 seed range, that they could draw an Oklahoma City team that's kind of coming back from some injuries. What kind of impact do you think having a guy like Brewer will have on Houston's defense as a whole? Because we've seen James Harden improve. We know that Patrick Beverley's going to get after you, and we know what Dwight Howard can do. And Trevor Ariza is a more than serviceable defender on the wing. What does having that guy who can kind of come in and maybe he can lock down a point guard for 5-6 minutes at a time for you do for them going forward?
Well, I kind of think Brewer's a little overrated defensively in the sense that he's not a lockdown guy. He's more of like an energy guy that can rack up steals, that can pressure the ball for short spurts. And I think that's valuable in the sense that when you're struggling, when your team is kind of down and they need some kind of boost, Brewer can do that on the defensive end. He can it doesn't show up on the box score, but he can motivate other guys to defend. And especially even on the offensive end, his defense is the catalyst for his offense. He gets a lot of his buckets in transition, a lot of them at the rim, and he knocks down the occasional corner three. And that's very valuable for a team like Houston. Especially you mentioned Ariza. Ariza's playing like 42 minutes a game in December, and he's really struggling shooting the ball since his hot start, and it's clearly because of fatigue, because he's short-arming a lot of his threes and everything. And having a guy like Corey Brewer to give him some rest is really valuable. It allows Ariza to breathe a bit, and Brewer's a good player. He fits exactly what they do. All he has to do is just get to the rim and jack up corner threes, which they'll happily take.
Yeah, and having that energy guy is really a big thing for those contending teams. You see a guy. I'll go back even. The Magic in the early 2000s. You have Darryl Armstrong, who really got his start because of his energy that he brings. And there's Brandon Wright is another guy who is a high energy guy and was great for the Mavs until he was moved. Do you think that they really need to make another move to solidify themselves up as one of those upper echelon teams in the West?
I think they are still kind of thin in the sense that they probably need another big man. Tarek Black has played well for them in terms of an offensive rebounder, but they really need that, rim, some kind of rim protector. I don't really have anyone in mind right now, but Ashik was huge for them last year, and just having a semblance of another rim protector, having 48 minutes of solid center play, I think would be very vital to them, especially because Dwight's been in and out of the lineup lately, and they're probably going to want to rest him. Nearing 30 at this point, and he's kind of losing his athleticism a bit, even though he's still really good. So that's really the thing that I think they need most. But I think this is good for their wing depth. They really needed it, and I think they're a contender in the West.
You touched on them needing a little bit more big depth. Maybe they look at a guy like Emeka Okafor if he
Yeah, he would.
decides to come back, or maybe they kick the tires some on Timofey Mozgov from the Denver Nuggets, who seems to be drawing interest from a handful of teams.
Mhm.
You know, there are guys out there that they can go get. It's just a matter of, do they have the assets to make a trade, or do they have the money to sign them?
Yeah, yeah. Maury's typically good at maneuvering trades and creating stuff out of nothing, so I wouldn't be surprised if they did that.
Right. Andrew, you know, just give me your general thoughts on the trade and what you think this does for Houston, not only this year, but moving forward, because they'll have Brewer for a couple more seasons.
Initially, when I heard about it, I thought it was a good trade. And as I look into it more, I start to wonder exactly what is the motive for Houston right here. And obviously, it's first and foremost to um, make more depth at the wing position, or positions rather. Trevor Ariza has been playing an ungodly amount of minutes, and he needs help. He needs a break. He needs someone behind him who can play. But after this year, Brewer's on a player option. He can opt out, and perceivingly, he could go somewhere and attract just as much money, if not a little bit more, from a also contending team. He could move. Obviously, the Rockets could re-sign him. That would just be more of a what happens after the offseason. But then you start to look at how the Houston offense flows. They got rid of a guy who is, by definition of Kevin McHale's offense, a key cog. He shoots threes and layups, and that's in Daniels. And you ship that off, and you get a guy in Corey Brewer. He takes nearly, or actually just a clip over 40% of his shots from outside of the restricted zone and inside the three-point line. That isn't something that fits into Morey's offense, not Morey's offense, McHale's offense. He got Alexei Shved back, who I'm assuming is not going to be seeing much, if any, time on that team. You've got Pat Bev, you got James Harden, you've got Isaiah Cannon, you've got Jason Terry, you got veteran, good young guys who are presumably more talented, more upside, whatnot than an Alexei Shved. And then you ship off a couple of second rounders who you could potentially use somewhere else. As I look at this trade more, I start to like it less. For Minnesota, however, I still think it's a pretty decent trade. They got a really young guy in Troy Daniels. He's going to come in there, shoot three, something that team has lacked so far this year and for the past couple of years, really. And then they got rid of Ronny Turioff. I mean, for Minnesota, I think it's a nice positive. For Houston, I'm starting to see more and more negative. And for the 76ers, Morey got another second-round pick. So,
yeah, you touch on the Sixers. How do you imagine that conversation went with Sam Hinkie and either Daryl Morey or whoever called from the Timberwolves?
Do you want a second-round pick? Yeah. Here, have this guy. Second-round pick? Yeah, you can have him too. Deal. Wasn't much more, I don't think.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, Philadelphia is one of those teams who's willing to shed anything in order to take on another pick. And it's like their motive lately has been to, we'll be that third team. Give me a second-round pick or a really heavily protected first-round pick or whatever it may be that they're going to receive. Like they are pick central USA.
Right, and we've seen that, their roster has so much fluctuation in it. A guy like Ronald Roberts was signed for, I think, a week or two, and then waived. He'll probably be signed again next month because they need somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, and they've got so much cap space that they can be that third team, and they can continue to stockpile those potential assets in second-round picks and first-round picks.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're the third team in 2 or 3 trades that may or may not come up throughout the rest of the way here, and potentially taking on bigger contracts, whether it be a guy like or a guy in a similar position to Ronnie Turioff, where he's injured for the season, he's not going to come back, and teams need a place to dump him. And obviously that would be most impactful on expiring deals, but even guys who have 2-year deals, that would be the team that if anyone is going to take these guys on, there's guys like Eric Gordon, guys like Ronnie Turioff, guys who are injury prone, whose teams don't like the contract that they have with them. That's the number one place I see them going if that team can also allocate some draft picks in the process.
Right, and there was a point in this season where their salary cap number sat at about $24 million, and just about $6.5 million of that was going to Jason Richardson, who's going to miss the season with I believe a foot injury.
Yeah.
So they've shown that willingness, especially if they're going to get those assets. Moving on from trades for now, I believe it was Sunday night. We got some pretty surprising news out of Sacramento when the Kings decided to fire head coach Mike Malone, who had gotten them off to a really serviceable and a pretty good start for their standards and what they were expected to do this season. They missed DeMarcus Cousins for the past 10, 12 games, and they began to fall a little bit, but that happens when you don't have your best player. Rick, we'll start with you. What do you think this kind of signals for the Kings and the direction that they're trying to go in?
Well, I think the one thing when trying to figure this all out is looking at the guy in charge. Vivek, who's only been here for a little while, has made it clear for one thing. He likes to go big and he likes to go bold. And there was clearly some friction in between Malone and the management. They didn't get along. There was all this leaking out that they were just looking for the moment to let him go. They didn't like how he had worked with the team. They expected more, apparently. And once Boogie went down, they said, that's our chance. We're dumping him. And look, you can grade it all you want. Vivek's got a team and he's doing what he wants. He's made big moves before. He gave Rudy Gay that massive deal. He traded for Derek Williams. He gave Carl Landry a ridiculous contract. He is willing to take a lot of gambles. He's very active, likes to be involved, and if he doesn't like Malone, he doesn't like him and he's going to dump him. And there's a lot of names that have popped up. Mark Jackson, Chris Mullin, even George Karl. A lot of big names are coming up with the Kings just because Vivek has some connections and maybe he's got a bigger plan. But right now it just looks like maybe there is a bigger plan, but he's just kind of rushing it and just saying, get Malone out of here. Let's put Ty Corbin in and see what he can do. I don't know what he can do, but let's see what he can do. And from there, we'll figure it out. But for now, let's run our plan. Let's let go of Mike Malone, which I think he's got to get a job somewhere else. A hot commodity, a really good head coach. Took a team that maybe we didn't see a lot coming out of and actually got really good production where we started to consider maybe they could be a sneaky team in the Western Conference. And maybe they still can the way they're playing. But this was a weird move. But for Vivek, he's clearly got a bigger plan going forward.
Yeah, and we've seen that Vivek's kind of a contrarian of sorts. He's talked about wanting to play some 4-on-5, have a guy cherry pick. They wanted to make a move for Josh Smith, which seems to befuddle everybody. They let Isaiah Thomas, who was really starting to turn into a very nice point guard, go and signed a guy in Darren Collison who is very serviceable, but he's probably better suited as backup, even though he's played extremely well. Do you think that Malone kind of got the short end of a stick here, or is this something that they needed to do and now is the best time to do it?
Well, I think for Malone, you got to look at this in whichever way he wants. So sure, he got the short end of the stick. He did a fantastic job in Sacramento. He got fired for reasons that maybe just had more to deal with management than any of his job production. But on the other end, if they didn't like him, he certainly got to show what he can do to other teams, and he got to showcase just how good of a coach he can be. And there's going to be a lot of teams lining up for him that before, I'm not sure he would have gotten the chance to get those offers. So give the Kings credit for giving him that opportunity to at least show what he can do. And at the same end, Sacramento's just doing what their plan is. If their whole time they weren't looking at Malone as their head coach, then this is just what they needed to do. It's just kind of surprising that this all leaked out in one big boom that nobody really saw coming. But this is the Kings' plan. Let Vivek be Vivek, and let's see what happens.
Letting Vivek be Vivek might be something that catches on here. Akbar, we've touched a little bit on them wanting to do some different things. Do you think that we see that now with Tyrone Corbin in charge? Do you think that they'll be able to kind of push their ideals on him a little bit more? Because he was their summer league coach who led them to the title, and they've said that they want to play more like that summer league team.
Well, Ty Corbin, quite frankly, isn't a very good coach and wasn't a very good coach in Utah. But, a guy who probably wasn't going to get a job anywhere else is probably going to be more malleable to what the Kings want to do right now. And if they want to play fast-paced, then I feel like Corbin is going to enforce that more than, say, Malone would, because Malone was more focused on adjusting his offense to his guys. Cousins is a throwback post-up guy. Rudy Gay is a really patient, probing kind of wing. And, a slow pace sort of fits their players more. But, with Vivek's plan and his desires to, run an exciting offense, I think Corbin is going to try to enforce that more. And in general, I'm not sure. When I first saw this trade, I was kind of mad because I thought they did it for basketball reasons, and I thought they were just being unreasonable, and their expectations are too high. And we know Vivek is kind of can seem kind of delusional at times. But the more I look, the more it seems like it really wasn't basketball more than politics. D'Alessandro didn't really pick Malone. They weren't really clicking. So, even though Malone didn't do anything to lose his job per se, he clearly wasn't their guy, and it, sort of makes sense why they wanted to get rid of him, because if he's not your guy, then I understand not feeling comfortable with the current direction the team is going. But at the same time, I still think that Malone's offense was much more tailored to the Kings players, and I feel like Vivek needs to sort of be more malleable to other suggestions, because things change and everything.
Yeah, I think that we were really starting to see some of those young guys like Ben McLemore. Cousins was starting to mature more. We're seeing guys really starting to turn the corner a little bit under Malone, and then they just kind of get the rug swept out from under them. Do you think that this was kind of a rash move by Vivek and one that they might regret down the line, or do you think that it'll end up working out for all parties involved?
It all depends on whether the front office can hire a guy that best utilizes these players' talents. But at the same time, I do think it was rash, because I don't think Malone did anything to lose his job. Young guys were developing under him, and he ran a perfect offense that suited Cousins' strengths. So I do think it was rash, and I don't think they should have done it, even though they didn't feel comfortable with Malone as their guy. They should have given him at least a year to see if he was meeting their expectations. And I just don't really see what they're trying to do here. I feel like they're trying to make a splash, but they don't really know what kind of splash they want. They don't really have clear, I don't know how to describe it, like a clear plan in mind with their team, and and if they do have a plan, it's not a very flexible plan.
All right, Andrew, Akbar touched on that a little bit. Do you think that this could open up them for making that big splash with a coach, maybe a Mark Jackson, maybe a George Karl? Maybe they look elsewhere, maybe somebody from San Antonio staff. What do you think about them potentially making a splash?
I think all inclination right now is that they're focused on getting a big name, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a big name in the fact that it needs to be like a coaching legend per se, or someone that we view as prestigious like George Karl. But rather, it just needs to be a name that's known in the area. This is a team that almost got moved out of Sacramento. It's a team that has struggled in the past, and until they got DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay, they were really kind of a no-show after 2004, I believe it was, when they started to lose a lot of their players from that Weber-Bibby era. Shaq comes in as owner now. Vivek comes in as owner, or Shaq comes in as a part owner, and Vivek comes in as the majority stakeholder. And you're seeing development. They signed Derek Collison, who's been playing fantastically this season for what we've come to expect from him. Ben McLemore's kind of had this mini breakout year where he's kind of gotten over that hump of everyone thinking that he's just going to turn into a sucky player, and now more towards, this guy looks like he can be a real rotation NBA player, and maybe even eventually a top 10 shooting guard in the league, depending on how much he can develop. And I think a lot of that had to do with Mike Malone being there as the coach. But that being said, him getting fired now, it opens up a lot of doors. If ownership wants to go the direction of signing a big name like a George Karl, like a Mark Jackson, maybe bringing in Chris Mullin to coach after this year is over, and just riding out the storm with Corbin. I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, and I think the decisions they make over the next 2 or 3 months in whether they hire or don't hire a coach will be very telling in what direction they want to move, whether that be a direction where they want to kind of rebrand themselves, or they want another little miniature roster overhaul where they try to keep Boogie and Rudy Gay, maybe bring in different pieces around them to fit a certain playing style. I think that there's a lot of things that are up in the air right now, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Vivek is being so aggressive with this plan right now, and I think part of that stems from the fact that they were irrelevant for so long, and he wants this team to be relevant. He wants them to remain in Sacramento. That's part of the reason he got this team, so that they would remain in Sacramento. And I think that I think this might have been a bit of a panic move, but like I said, we're gonna have to wait to see what happens.
Do you think that they go and they get their new coach mid-season, kind of like the Lakers did once they fired Mike Brown and signed Mike D'Antoni a couple of years ago, or do you think they wait till the offseason when they can really do a thorough search?
There's a lot of rumors going around right now, between George Karl, between Mark Jackson, between Chris Mullin, letting Ty Corbin coach out the remainder of the year. I think their smartest option would be to let Ty Corbin coach the remainder of this year. Odds are they weren't going to make the playoffs anyways, just because of the depth and the strength of the West. So letting this season play out as a development year, and just letting the pieces work themselves around here, and then figuring out where you want to go during the off season when you can make some more moves, maybe move a few pieces depending on what coach you pick, and to really develop a roster around the guy that you bring in to coach, as opposed to hiring a coach to fit your guys. I think it goes without saying that coaches who have their guys have been more successful in this league than have guys who have had a coach who fits their system. A guy like Phil Jackson doesn't go and win championships with Carmelo Anthony in that roster right now. They don't have the pieces to run the triangle offense. They don't have the pieces to run his system. Similarly, Rick Carlisle in 2011, he had pieces, and that team played above expectations. Eric Spoelstra had the pieces. They brought him in as a coach, and they got LeBron, they got D Wade, they got Chris Bosh, and they kind of let him move those guys around and work them into his system. And eventually it worked out, and they won 2 championships in a row and went to 4 finals in a row. I mean, I think it goes without saying that that would be their best option.
Yeah, James, Andrew touched on this a little bit. We've seen that growth from Ben McLemore this year. Do you think that moving a guy or getting rid of a guy in Malone who has really kind of helped them push that development will kind of stunt the development of some of their young guys, mainly McLemore or maybe their rookie Nick Stauskas?
Yeah, I don't really see Ty Corbin as a player development aficionado in any sense. Mike Malone definitely. Not only the rookies, but just the team as a collective. I mean, look, these guys started out 5-1. I mean, who the heck thought they would, be atop their division, at any point in the season. Rudy Gay has turned into a competent player again, because of Mike Malone. DeMarcus Cousins just was incredible. And then he went down with the unfortunate meningitis. And you know what? I mean, I'm not really sure whether Ty Corbin can develop Nick Stauskas or maybe Ben McLemore, but I don't see him as a guy that could assist young talent whatsoever. I mean, I didn't even know that the Kings had expectations in the first place. But who knows? I mean, anything could happen.
Yeah. I think that we've seen what Ty Corbin can do with a young team in Utah. Gordon Hayward really began to blossom, and he got that max contract offer from the Charlotte Hornets in the offseason. Derek Favors really began to turn the corner. The one guy that really didn't seem to develop much was Enes Kanter. And, I mean, this year under first-year head coach Quinn Snyder, Kanter, expanded his range, and he's added that corner 3. So, it's kind of hit or miss with Corbin, I think, on that. It could be good, it could be bad, but I really like the direction that Malone had that team going in. He was preaching that they needed to work on the defensive end and let their defense feed into their offense, and it felt like it was working because they were playing exceptionally well. And then DeMarcus Cousins goes down with the meningitis, and now it's history. But we touched on those couple of trades earlier, and we're really starting to get into trade season and rumor season. Is there anybody out there that you think could or should be dealt before or at the deadline, and maybe a potential team that could go and get that player, Akbar?
The guy that comes to mind for me is probably Jeff Green. He's probably having his best season so far, and he's a really useful role player in the sense that he can shoot the 3. He's a really good driver. He can post a couple of guys up. He can play the 4 if need be. And I just don't think he really fits Boston's plan. He's making around $9 million a year. He's 28 years old, and I think they would be better served getting more picks or any kind of young asset back for him. And a team that I would watch out for in the Jeff Green sweepstakes is probably the Pelicans, because they are desperate need of wing depth. Dante Cunningham has played well for them, but they probably need a bit of more of an upgrade there. And another team, I'm not so sure if they can make this trade because they're right now really close to the hard cap. But the Clippers probably could use Jeff Green because they're really really thin on wings right now.
Yeah, and you look at Green, he's got one of those contracts that seem like it should be pretty movable overall. It's I believe he's got this season at $9.2 million, and then next season, which is a player option at $9.2. So the Pelicans could use him, and the Clippers have been rumored to be interested in some of those wings, but they just don't have the pieces to go get him.
Yeah.
And since they're so close to being hard capped out, it's really hard because can they afford to move a guy like DeAndre Jordan? Or can they move both J.J. Redick and Jamal Crawford and still get something impactful back at that shooting guard position?
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, I know you'd mentioned somebody earlier that, we've heard his name pop up some, but not a whole lot. But who do you think is a guy that could be on the move?
As far as a guy that goes on the move, and this is as far as on the move is concerned, the Pelicans have come out and said that Ryan Anderson is not on the trading block. I'm not totally buying that. It's been discussed between us, between a lot of other pundits, between a lot of people who follow the NBA in general. Having your sixth man play the same position as your best player and in my opinion, third best player in the world right now, doesn't really work. And it doesn't work because normally you want to get that guy in at his position at around 36 to 38 minutes a game. That leaves your sixth man, who you would normally want averaging roughly 25 minutes a game, 10 to 12 minutes a game at his natural position. It's not going to work. Anderson's contract is very movable. It's high value. You can probably get a very decent, if not sizable, return. I think if they were to trade with a team like, say, the Celtics for Jeff Green, I think there's a possibility that because of Anderson's age and the impact that he can have as a trade asset for the Celtics, you could potentially be looking at dragging in a first-round pick and a player like Jeff Green from the Celtics in, and that would really help the Pelicans. In fact, they don't have draft picks this year or next, if I remember correctly. And draft picks are really, really important in the NBA today because of the value of young players on low money contracts or lower money contracts. I mean, I'd kill to have a veteran minimum, but that's just me. So if you can move a guy like Ryan Anderson, maybe bring in a pick and a wing player, specifically a small forward who can shoot threes and even be an average defender. He doesn't have to be a defensive specialist by any means, but just a guy who can spread the floor and not get in foul trouble like we've seen Luke Babbitt getting. I believe it's been 5 or 6 games in a row now where he's gone out of the game within the first 5 or 6 minutes with 2 fouls, and that is mostly due in part to his athleticism, which is almost non-existent compared to some of the other players you see at that position in the league. And I think that's going to be really important moving forward for the Pelicans roster.
Yeah, another team that kind of comes to mind when you talk about Ryan Anderson would be the Phoenix Suns.
Mm-hmm.
They have a guy in Gerald Green who he's only making about $3.5 million, but he has an expiring contract. They have a guy in PJ Tucker who they'll most likely want to keep, but he would be a guy that would be a pretty good fit on that Pelicans team. And they've really kind of struggled to, make a move from that offense last year when they had that true floor spacing big man in Channing Frye, and that's what Ryan Anderson does. He's a dead-eye three-point shooter, and he would really help open up a lot for Goran Dragic and Eric Bledsoe. If they wanted to do that, it might have to be a three-team trade. But, that would be another team that I could think of that could jump in there.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that we talked about it earlier, where you have a team like Philadelphia who can come in and absorb a contract if necessary to make cap room work. And, assuming they receive a second-round pick or multiple second-round picks or even a first-round pick from, say, a team like the Suns, who I believe have 2 or 3 first-round picks this year. I think it's 2. But, if they're willing to give up 1 and move send that to a team like the Sixers, the Pelicans could send another player to the Sixers and then swap players, whether it be Ryan Anderson or, however it may work out. It's just plays like that will, plays like that will ultimately decide, I think, this team's fate in the playoffs, especially coming down the road. You need guys that you need a complete roster, and that's not something the Pelicans have. You need guys who can space the floor. You need guys who can cut. You need guys who can protect the rim. And you need ball handlers. And I think they have all of that, except for guys who can space the floor adeptly.
Yeah, James, I know that we've talked about this guy before in the last week or so, quite a bit. But Lance Stevenson with the Charlotte Hornets, you think that he's going to be gone? I think that pretty much everybody thinks that he's going to be moved. What team or who do you think makes sense for Lance at this point? And does it make sense for the Hornets going to it?
It's actually really tough to say what team would take him. I mean, the team I have had in mind is like the Nets. Despite Hornets actually recently said they are going to keep Lance. His contract is 2 years, $18 million. He has, I think, a team option for the third year.
I believe it's a player option for that third year. It's 3 years, $27 million, I believe, is what he signed for.
Oh, it's a player?
I believe so.
Oh, okay. If it was a team, then I think it would be a movable contract. I mean, I think it is a movable contract, but just right now, Stevenson is he's just like stinking it up. I mean, and the Hornets as well. But I mean, I do. It's actually really hard to say what team would take him. I just say the Nets because why not? And I don't really think Sergei Karasev is their main bench shooting guard, and even Alan Anderson, who's been actually very, very good. But why not add Lance in there, in the mix for the heck of it? I mean, it's the Nets, so. But as for other teams, I'm not sure what teams would. There have been a series of offers, like according to some writers and pundits, but I don't know what teams actually offered, to get Lance. So I'm not really sure. It depends what the offers were. Like if I was able to see what the offers were from the other teams that offered to get Lance, then maybe I would judge to see, whether or not that would have been, a good deal or not. So, the Nets. I think would be like a likely candidate, but it's tough to say.
Yeah, I believe it was Mark Stein of ESPN last night that said that the Heat had kicked the tires on us. The Indiana Pacers had thought about potentially bringing him back. You look at both those teams, and it's kind of like, well, what do they give Charlotte that gives them real value? I mean, mate, and how does he fit in the grand scheme of things for them?
I mean, the Pacers are kind of like a tire fire right now. I mean, I don't really think they have too many assets to give away. The Heat, the Heat are actually interesting. I mean, I'm not sure whether or not, well, Dwayne Wade has been very good this year. I will say that. But the Heat wouldn't be actually a bad team for Lance. It's just that I don't know if maybe they have offered for him. I'm not sure. It's just there hasn't been a lot. There's a lot of anonymity in regards to a Lance Stevenson trade offer. So it's tough to say whether you know he would be.
It's tough to say what team's actually in on him and what they're actually offering.
Yeah, that exactly.
Um,
I mean, whether it's like picks or other like maybe bench players, because Lance has just been like stinking it up so much this year.
yeah. Rick, you have a guy in Wilson Chandler who has been rumored to have interest from the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he seems like a guy who could really fit on a lot of those teams that need wing help. Why did you pick Chandler, and where do you think he ends up if he is in fact dealt?
Well, look, when you're talking about trade possibilities, especially as we get closer to the trade deadline, you start to go away from bigger names. They always go early in the year, obviously with Rondo this year, Rudy Gay's deal last year. Most of the big deals are nowhere near the trade deadline. So I think we're done with the big names as far as this year, and that brings us to a guy like Wilson Chandler. When you're talking about deals that go down at the deadline, it's these middle-of-the-ground teams that want to upgrade to try and get into contender status. We saw Dallas and Houston do it, and now the other Western teams and maybe some East teams are going to try to make that. And Wilson Chandler could help the Thunder. Kevin Durant has had a lot of injuries, and they've been relying on Perry Jones to play. So Wilson Chandler is a guy you can bring in who can play a lot of productive minutes, be a very big threat at the three-point line, a really serviceable player that does the job. The other two teams you might see, the Clippers, if they could even find the pieces to move, that's really a guy that they could get that would greatly affect them with who they're trying to play, Hito Turkoglu and all these other guys who are doing some kind of serviceable job but not what they want if they want to be a contender. And then, of course, the Pelicans. Look, if Jeff Green's too expensive, you can go for a guy like Wilson Chandler who does what you need, helps out on the three-point, can play some defense. Really, Denver's in that position where a lot of their guys are tradable. Timofey Mozgov, you could even try and swing some of the other guys, Nate Robinson. They're going to be looking to move pieces because they don't want to be in that middle ground and they don't have a superstar right now. Kenneth Faried is kind of fringe, but not really. And it's going to be a lot of these middle-of-the-ground teams trying to make moves to get better. The Cavs are going to be looking to get better. They'll probably move Dion Waiters. There's the possibility Detroit could try to move one of their bigs, Monroe or Smith, but it's going to be difficult for them to do that this year. Brooklyn's going to be looking to move some pieces, maybe even if it's not some big pieces. They're going to try to make deals. But all these middle-of-the-ground teams are going to be looking at the lower teams, trying to get some talent for them and giving up assets. And Wilson Chandler is almost a guarantee because if Denver's going to be doing a fire sale, they'll probably want to keep Gallinari because of the contract, and it's tough to trade that. And Chandler's a guy that a lot of teams will want. He's simple, he fills a role, and he does the job. And there's going to be a laundry list of teams that want his services.
Yeah, and a little bit more on his potential fit with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Having a guy like him really can open things up. That allows him to potentially go with like a Russell Westbrook, Reggie Jackson, Chandler, Durant, Ibaka lineup. It helps open things up versatility-wise.
Well, I mean, they've had issues on their bench. When we saw Westbrook and Durant go down, scoring has been a huge problem. They don't have the depth to compete, and that's going to be a trouble in the playoffs. Getting a guy like Chandler who can play a good amount of minutes a night and can put up reliable points is big for them, because when they start to play, if they go up against a team like the Grizzlies, they're going to be tired, and they're going to need their bench players to give their starters a rest. Putting in a guy like Chandler, you can rest Durant for a few minutes, maybe even run some different kind of lineups to sit Ibaka for just a few. They can use him to benefit the entire team, not just in scoring, but in overall just their health going forward, because it's seen how big of an issue it is. It's a big need to get bench players for them, and Chandler seems like the guy that could fit that role.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to our final topic of the evening. We're about a quarter of the way to just a little bit over a quarter of the way into the season for every team. The halfway mark is coming up quick. The Orlando Magic played their league-leading 29th game tonight, which is crazy for me to think. But who are some teams that have been, or who's a team that's been surprising and a team that's been disappointing to you in the first month and a half or so, Andrew?
Surprising to me was the Sacramento Kings. We talked a little bit about them earlier. At first, I was surprised because they were playing so well, and it was rather astonishing to watch Boogie Cousins rival Anthony Davis. We thought AD was going to be this guy who took the magical leap into top-tier superstardom, and Boogie was, by most accounts, step by step with him the whole way. Rudy Gay was playing really well. Ben McLemore was having 23, 24, 25-point game nights on, I believe, like an every other game basis for a couple weeks there. Darren Collison was playing out of his mind, and they were getting productive minutes out of the bench. And then, just to add more fuel to the fire, surprisingly, they fired Mike Malone. Boogie goes down with viral meningitis, and now they are the tire fire that is a Ty Corbin coached basketball team. And disappointing for me was San Antonio. Had a lot of injuries. We're used to seeing them sit guys there, but they've been decimated with injuries. They've had Manu out games. They've had Duncan out games. They've had Tony Parker out for almost upward of a month already. They're missing key shooters in the wings. Kawhi Leonard missed the first couple of games, and he's also been out now with a torn ligament in his hand for upward of a month. I mean, it's just not been good. And now they're sitting at 7th in the Western Conference at 17-10, and they're 4th place in their division, the Southwest, and that is the gauntlet of the division, which holds Memphis, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and New Orleans Pelicans, all 5 of which are in the playoffs at the moment. New Orleans being the team in 5th place at 13-12, just over 500. But I think it's incredible that a team who is that team is a perennial finals contender, regardless of what anybody wants to think, until Pop, Duncan, Manu, and Tony Parker, go their own ways. This team will more than likely always be in the hunt, and it's because of a system. And the fact that they are only 17-10 this year to me has been astonishing because of just how good they were last year.
Yeah, and I think that once they get guys back and they're healthy, that'll kind of even out, and we'll probably see them still end up with probably a 3 or a 4 seed in the Western Conference this year. I think Golden State and Memphis are going to be really tough to catch.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they end up as a 3 or 4. I think they pull off, once they get healthy, I think they pull off a 12, 15 game win streak and catapult themselves up into that tier of 3, 4.
Probably right around their rodeo road trip in February.
Yeah.
So they always seem to go on that run once they go on the road because Greg Popovich just has them so ready.
Yep.
James, you cover a team that's been relatively disappointing in and of itself in the New York Knicks, but you have another team from the Eastern Conference who's been disappointing, and a team that we just mentioned briefly, the Grizzlies, as your surprising team. Please do elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect Memphis to catapult right to the top of the West. You know, I do. Mike Conley has turned into like a borderline, like like top 5 point guard. Like yeah, you could probably like interchange him and like Chris Paul or someone like that. But Dave Yerger has done a fantastic job, and who cares if the pace is bottom five pace? I mean, these guys are just the grindfather Tony Allen continues to be he's playing his best lockdown defense like night after night. Even Vince Carter has done his fair share with shooting threes, and they I think because they added him and they added Courtney Lee for 3 point shooting. That was a big that's a nice Courtney Lee shooting 55% from three. That's like astronomical. That's like Kyle Korver type three numbers, and and Bino Udrih, who's a old Knicks reject, is now playing under a coach that has that's sane, and these guys all around are just like fantastic to watch, and I like their the grinding. I really like Marc Gasol and Zach Randolph. Those guys are like great, glass cleaners, and Marc Gasol, former Defensive Player of the Year. The way he just like, with his like ridiculous wingspan, just blocks passing lanes with his long arms, and and his block shots. I think it's fantastic to watch.
What do you? Why do you have the Hornets as your disappointing team?
Well, I thought the Hornets at the beginning of the season, I had them as like considering the fact that the East is just like a dumpster fire in general, I did have them as like a 6-7 seed, but I didn't expect them to be this bad. I mean, I think Steve Clifford is a very competent coach. He definitely improved their. He's like a very defensive oriented coach, and I think that's part of why he got into the playoffs last year. They ranked 5th in defensive rating last year. That's just how good their defense was. With Al Jefferson as their main guy to build around. And he's one of the best post players in the league, if not the best. I mean, that's debatable, but they're just maybe. I think Lance Stevenson maybe has something to do with his volatile mercurial personality, has to do with locker room issues, and that's one part of it. Kemba Walker is like iffy. Marvin Williams, I didn't even know he still existed. Just giving him a payday for whatever reason. I have no idea why, but you know what? I do think though they could. They're only a few games out of the play out of the 8th seed, so I mean maybe they can turn it around. I mean it's only a quarter of the season has gone by, and I think they can turn it around though.
Yeah, I think that they've been a pretty disappointing team for a lot of people. Rick, you're going with a couple of Eastern Conference teams. Go ahead and let's talk about your disappointment right now.
My surprise and disappointment kind of revolve around Jason Kidd. When we were talking about kind of the East teams that were expected to do a lot, I don't think a lot of people had Milwaukee on their radar. They've been really fun, and yes, Jabari Parker is hurt, but talk about the improvement they had last year. Last year they had 15 wins. They're already at 14 wins. We're only a quarter of the way through the year. Last year they had 3 wins versus the West already. They have 6 wins versus the Western Conference. And they're already won 4 games versus the projected playoff teams compared to 2 from last year. They have a lot of improvement. Jason Kidd is getting a lot out of these younger guys. Look what Brandon Wright is doing. He's looking like a really good point guard. And not sure a lot of people saw that one coming. They're using a lot of these utility guys. O.J. Mayo looks like he might have just resurrected his career with what he's doing this year. Ersan Ilyasova is doing some things off the bench. Larry Sanders is still there. that you're really wondering when is he going to get on track. His stats haven't been really great, but overall as a team, they're doing what they need to do. They're competing. They're right now, I believe, sixth in the Eastern Conference, which surprise. Charlotte's struggling, and some other Eastern Conference teams are struggling, but they're getting the job done night in and night out. And even without Jabari Parker, they're winning some tough games versus some really good teams. Speaking of Jason Kidd, the team that he left, the Brooklyn Nets, has not been playing well whatsoever. Sure, they weren't really high expectations going in for this team, but they were in the conference semifinals last year, and now they're talking about blowing up the team, which is it's not what you want to hear. Their depth has been an issue. Giving all those guys money is starting to show, and their backups are not really serviceable when they're putting in the game. They're a slow team, not really a lot of players that can spark a comeback when they need it. They're losing by a lot. Only six of their losses have been under 10 points. They're getting blown out a lot. Their shooting numbers have been really low, and they've had some really bad losses this year. It's a team that obviously needs a rebuild, but because of the contracts, you're not really sure when they can get it and how quick they can get it. And they already gave away all their draft picks to Boston, so they're in a really bad situation, and all that risk, it did not get much reward other than a few conference semifinals trips. This is a mess of a team, and maybe they do go for Lance Stevenson and gamble on that, but when you're talking about a team going for Lance Stevenson to try and salvage themselves, not really a great position in this NBA.
Yeah, and not only their product on the court, but off the court is kind of been a little in question because Mikhail Prokhorov is apparently looking to sell the team, especially from what I've heard from talking to some people around the league. And it sounds like that's what they're going to do, which it makes sense why they're trying to shed some money because I don't envision anyone wanting to buy a team that's going to be paying $170 million in salary each season too, on top of probably the close to $1 billion that it would cost them to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place with that situation. They got Lionel Hollins. They were clearly looking to try and do what they did last year, and it just completely blew up. They're not in a good position with those contracts. If they're trying to sell the team, they're clearly not in a winning situation. And with how open the Eastern Conference is, it's really disappointing just how quick and how hard Brooklyn fell to the ground with this roster. It's going to be a while before we really hear them in any contender status talk, at least a few years, if not longer.
Yeah, and Akbar, you've also got a couple of Eastern Conference teams and a couple of division foes there in Miami and Atlanta.
Basically, Atlanta has been my my surprising team because I thought they were going to be good, and I saw a lot of other basketball pundits predicting them to be good, but at the same time, I didn't know how long it would take for Horford to be acclimated into the system, again, after being injured for so long, and at the same time, I just wasn't that sold on them because they didn't have really any players that popped or were really special to me, and their defense seemed kind of suspect. But they've proven me wrong big time this year. Jeff Teague is having by far his best season. Kyle Korver is just shooting an absurd percentage from three right now. His gravity affects everyone else on offense. Paul Millsap is the same consistent player he was last year. Horford's still not the player he was last year, and he's still trying to get back into the flow, but he's still a very more than serviceable center. And it's amazing that they're doing this well without him. Right now they're third in the Eastern Conference, and I had no idea they would be this good, pretty much. My most disappointing team is probably the Miami Heat, because I kind of expected them to be a lot better. I understood their injury problems with Wade and they weren't very deep. But at the same time, they still had two superstars, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and one guy who hadn't had the number one role in a while, and is in general a really good player, and who's played really well this year. But despite and both those guys have actually done a terrific job this year. But at the same time, they're not deep. Their defense has regressed a lot because they just don't have the same athletes to run the kind of defense they usually run. And they had to start Norris Cole so they could move Mario Chalmers to the backup shooting guard. That's how bad their depth is right now. And and right now Bosch is hurt. Wade is in and out of the lineup. And McRoberts is out for the season. So injuries have ravaged them, and they've just looked like a really mediocre team. And I thought, with a guy like Spoelstra, who did so well when Wade was the only guy, and he had a bunch of trash around him, winning 47 games, I thought they could make that kind of magic again this season, and clearly I was wrong so far.
Yeah, that Heat team has been a bit of a disappointment, but you look at Atlanta, and they've really kind of put some nice pieces together, and they're playing really well. And Mike Budenholzer has done a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could see Atlanta really make some noise in the East, and
Yeah.
it depends on how Cleveland and Chicago kind of level out as the season progresses.
The thing with the Hawks is they're so unique with their three-point shooting, and they have so many different lineups they can throw out there. They can just give teams fits because of how much they space the floor and how quick their bigs are and how much gravity Korver attracts. There's no team like them in the Eastern Conference, and I'd be really scared of playing them in the first round if I was any Eastern Conference team, or in the second round if I was any Eastern Conference team, because they're definitely going to give teams fits.
Yeah, they were in Orlando last Saturday, and even though they ended up losing on a buzzer beater, right before that they drew up a really nice play for Kyle Korver, who hit a ridiculous three. But they're playing basketball in a good, fun way, and it's showing, and it's really working out. Do you guys have any final thoughts for tonight that you'd like to share on any of the topics or anything that we might have seen in the last couple of days in the NBA?
I think Dallas's offensive efficiency is going to go up, as scary as that sounds.
Do you have that number on hand by any chance?
I believe right now it's at 116.7. I can double check that very quickly.
Oh my God.
James, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, as long as the Kings don't hire Vinny Del Negro, then they should be okay.
God. Rick?
It's going to be interesting to see what some of these teams' plans, especially with what Dallas has done. We could see another trade go down in the next couple of weeks. I could see Thunder, Clippers doing something. It's going to be really exciting to see the Thunder come back, to see if they can get back in the Western Conference picture. Going to be exciting to see which of these Eastern Conference teams really start to separate themselves from the pack. It's just a good time for basketball.
Dallas Mavericks offensive rating right now is 113.6.
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe they'll end up getting up to that 116.7 mark.
I would not be surprised.
Akbar?
I'm really interested to see what happens in the West. Rondo's obviously going to take time to get acclimated to Dallas, but all these teams are probably going to try to boost themselves, and we're going to see really who is the best team, who are the best teams, and who are pretenders. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in the West. In the East, a lot of people like Cleveland and Chicago as the clear top two teams, and everyone else basically just floating around. Right now, it's a huge toss-up between Washington, Toronto, Atlanta, Chicago, and Cleveland, and it just makes a really exciting Eastern Conference, and so many possible matchups there. And I think all five of these teams are pretty much evenly matched at this point, and it's just really fun to see how they're going to strategically try to battle each other in the playoffs and in the regular season.
Yeah, those five teams in the Eastern Conference are pretty much under a blanket, and they all really seem to match up well with each other. Yeah. But that's going to do it for tonight's episode of the 4 on 5. I'm your host, Zach Oliver. You can find me on Twitter at Zach Oliver NBA, and you can find my work on SB Nation's Orlando Pinstripe Post, the Independent Thunder Obsessed, and the HP Basketball Network's Friendly Bounce. We'll go around one more time. State your name, affiliate, and Twitter handle. Start with Akbar.
My name is Akbar Naqvi, and my Twitter handle is Akbar Raza Naqvi. It's spelled AKBARRAZANAQVI, with an at in front of it, obviously. And you can find my work at SB Nation Bullets Forever.
Andrew?
My name's Andrew Montaigne. You can find me at Andrew Montaigne. Last name is spelled Montanye. My work is found at Pelican Debrief and occasionally through my Twitter rants. And that's it.
James?
I'm James Griffo. You can find my work at Fansided's Daily Knicks, and my Twitter handle is J_Griff. I'll put it in the chat box right here. And also, I want to say that the Warriors are absolutely unfair.
And last but certainly not least, Rick and his peacock.
I'm Rick Stone. You can find me at Rick Stone NBA. That's RickStone NBA. You can read my stuff at Pelican Debrief, and if you want to follow me, I get some great puns on there. You'll love them. And of course, I am the leader in Austin Rivers rants, so you will not see a shortage of those.
All right, well, once again, this is the 4-on-5 podcast, and we're signing off for tonight. Thank you.
Yeah.